All right, so you ready to go deep on this one?
Let's do it.
Okay, because today we're tackling a question that's fascinated people for centuries. Can psychedelics actually change your consciousness? Or is it all just like some supercharged placebo effect? We've got a really interesting mix of stuff to dig into for this deep dive. Some scientific papers and excerpts from How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. So we'll be exploring the whole world of like expectancy, neuroscience, and how our minds basically shape the reality we experience.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me is that for centuries, like you said, cultures all over the world have used psychedelics in rituals for healing. But now with modern science, there's this whole debate. Are these experiences actually transforming people, or is it all just the power of suggestion?
Right, and Pollan's book throws us right into the deep end with that story about Albert Hofmann. You know, the chemist who first synthesized LSD. That first trip he had is just mind-blowing because he had zero expectations, like literally zero. So it's got to be like the purest example of what the drug actually does.
Totally. I mean, Hofmann wasn't trying to cure anything. He wasn't looking for a mystical experience. He just took the substance and wrote down what happened. Which makes you wonder, how much do our expectations actually shape what we experience during a trip?
Oh, for sure. And his experience was wild. He describes seeing this uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures. Extraordinary shapes with intense kaleidoscopic play of colors. It's almost like a baseline, for understanding the true effects of LSD without any of the cultural baggage or expectations.
I see what you mean. And then it gets even more interesting when you think about what happened as more people started experimenting with LSD. All of a sudden, their descriptions start to sound a lot like Aldous Huxley's mescaline experience from The Doors of Perception. It's like a shared cultural narrative starts to form around the drug.
So we're seeing the power of expectation in action.
Yeah.
But I mean, does that mean it's all just a placebo effect?
Well, not necessarily. While you can't deny the power of suggestion, there's a growing body of neuroscience research that suggests there are some real changes happening in the brain when you're on psychedelics.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. Pollan talks about the default mode network, or DMN. It's basically like the brain's control center, keeping everything running smoothly.
Right, like think of the DMN as the conductor of an orchestra, making sure all the musicians are in sync. It's responsible for our sense of self, our ability to plan and analyze. It filters out all that sensory information that's constantly bombarding us.
Okay, got it. So it keeps everything organized. But there are studies that show that psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, actually quiets down activity in the DMN.
Yeah, and this is where things get really wild. The experts are looking at brain scans, and they're seeing that psilocybin isn't just shutting parts of the brain down, it's making different regions talk to each other more. It's like suddenly your brain can access all these pathways that were blocked before.
Whoa, okay, so it's like the conductor takes a break, and the musicians just start jamming and making a whole new kind of music. Is that why people report feeling that sense of ego death or oneness with the universe?
That's a pretty compelling theory. That weakening of the DMN's control could allow for all this unfiltered sensory information to flood in. The boundaries of the self start to dissolve. It's almost as if the brain's normal hierarchy of information processing gets totally disrupted, leading to all these novel experiences and perspectives.
Wow, okay. So this brings us back to the big question. Are these really profound shifts just the brain being tricked? Or is there something deeper happening here? Like, how do we even begin to separate the effects of the drug itself from all the powerful expectations around it?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. That's why all these placebo-controlled studies are so important in psychedelic research. We need to compare what people experience when they get the real drug versus when they get a placebo. And we have to carefully control the environment and mindset.
But hold on, how do you even create a placebo for a psychedelic experience? It seems like you know right away if you were actually tripping or not.
It's definitely a challenge. I mean, researchers have been experimenting with a bunch of different methods, like using substances that create some kind of mild physical effect, like tingling or changes in body temperature. The key is to create a sensory experience that's convincing enough to mimic some parts of a trip, without actually activating the same brain pathways.
So what have these placebo-controlled studies shown us? Are the effects of psychedelics really unique? Or can our minds create similar experiences all on their own?
The findings are super interesting. Some things like seeing weird visuals, those might be influenced by expectations, but then there are these other effects like feeling like your ego is dissolving, or even long-term changes in someone's personality. It's hard to explain those away as just a placebo effect.
Right, it's like some experiences go beyond the surface and really change who you are as a person. Pollan mentions a study using psilocybin to treat existential distress in people with cancer. The results were unbelievable. Many people said they completely lost their fear of death after a single session with a guide.
Is groundbreaking stuff, but it's super important to remember that we're still in the early stages of research. We need larger, more rigorous trials to really get a grasp on the potential therapeutic benefits and long-term effects of psychedelics.
I feel like we're finally starting to uncover the secrets of these substances. After, decades of stigma and misinformation? Speaking of that, Paulin gets into the history of psychedelic research. And it turns out there was a whole wave of studies back in the 50s and 60s. Before these substances were demonized.
Exactly. Back then, researchers were exploring LSD and psilocybin to treat all kinds of things: alcoholism, depression, anxiety. They even thought they could enhance creativity and help people solve problems better.
Wow. And then everything came crashing down. The bad trips, the media hype, the association with the counterculture, research basically stopped. It's crazy how cultural perceptions and political agendas can totally derail scientific progress.
Absolutely. I mean, the story of psychedelic research isn't just about science. It's about social history and what people were afraid of back then. It just goes to show that trying to learn things is never purely objective. It's always influenced by what's going on in the world at that time.
So we have all these personal stories, plus the cultural narratives and some really fascinating glimpses into how psychedelics affect the brain. What do we do with all this information? What are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I think the first thing is recognizing how powerful expectation really is. Our minds are incredibly open to suggestion, and that can really influence what we experience, especially in altered states of consciousness.
But it's not all in our heads, right? There's got to be something more going on.
Yeah, exactly. Neuroscience is starting to give us some pretty compelling evidence that psychedelics can actually change the brain, especially in places like the default mode network. This disruption of normal brain activity could explain the unique effects of these substances, from that feeling of your ego dissolving to mystical experiences.
It's like they're shaking up the snow globe of our perception, and all our assumptions and beliefs settle into these new and totally unexpected patterns.
That's a great way to put it. It really speaks to how psychedelics can expand our understanding of reality and even challenge our most deeply held beliefs.
Right, but we also have to be real about the risks, right? It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
Of course not. While psychedelics have incredible potential, they're powerful and they can be unpredictable. You have to approach them carefully and respectfully. Set and setting, or your mindset and environment, are super important, and you should always prioritize responsible use.
And Paulin emphasizes that too, right? The importance of guides in those traditional psychedelic ceremonies, and how modern psychedelic therapy is learning from those practices.
Yeah, a guide's role is to provide support, reassurance, and a safe space for the experience. They can help people navigate difficult emotional terrain and help them integrate the insights they gain from the journey.
So it's like having a skilled navigator for a journey into the depths of your consciousness. Someone who can help you chart the course and stay safe, especially with all the unpredictable currents.
That's a good way to think about it. A skilled navigator wouldn't just take off on a journey without being prepared and understanding the risks. Same thing goes for exploring the world of psychedelics.
You mentioned therapeutic applications before. Can we get into that a bit more?
Sure. While a mystical experience might be transformative on a personal level, the question is, does it lead to lasting changes in people's behavior? Or even relief from things like addiction or anxiety?
That's where the research gets really exciting. Paulin describes a study where they gave psilocybin to longtime smokers who wanted to quit. And get this, they had an 80% success rate. That's way better than any traditional smoking cessation program.
It's amazing, isn't it? One theory is that the psychedelic experience is just so profound that it allows people to completely rethink their relationship with their addiction. They step outside their normal way of thinking, and they see their own behavior from a brand new perspective.
Paulin calls it dope slapping people out of their story. It's like the experience wakes you up and forces you to face the narrative you've been telling yourself about who you are and why you do the things you do.
I like that. It really captures the potential these substances have to disrupt those deeply rooted habits and compulsions. And they're looking at this in research on alcoholism and other addictions too. The early results are really promising.
But it's not only addiction, right? There's also research on using psychedelics to treat depression and anxiety, especially for people with life-threatening illnesses. Paulin shares some amazing stories from those psilocybin trials at NYU with the cancer patients.
Those studies are changing everything. They're exploring the idea that psychedelics can help people accept their own mortality and find peace and acceptance. The results have been overwhelmingly positive. Many participants say their anxiety and depression decreased significantly, and they have a greater sense of meaning and purpose in their lives.
It's like they're given a glimpse of another way of being, a perspective where death doesn't seem so scary anymore.
What's fascinating is that these experiences often involve feeling connected to something bigger than themselves, a feeling of unity with nature, the universe, or higher power, whatever that means to them.
That's a powerful concept. But how does that fit with the idea of the placebo effect? Couldn't you say that these people are just experiencing what they expect to experience? They go into these sessions hoping for relief, and their minds create that reality for them.
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers are really trying to figure out. While expectations definitely play a role, there are findings that suggest it's not just the placebo effect.
Like what? What makes you think it's more than just the mind playing tricks?
Well, for one thing, the effects of psychedelics often last long after the drug has worn off. People describe lasting changes in their personalities, their values, their whole outlook on life. It's hard to explain those as just a result of suggestion.
Right. Pollan talks about a study where people who had what they call complete mystical experiences on psilocybin, they showed long-term increases in a personality trait called openness to experience. That seems pretty significant.
It is. Openness to experience includes things like curiosity, imagination, and being willing to see things from new perspectives. It's a trait linked to creativity, adaptability, and overall well-being.
So are we saying that psychedelics can actually change your personality?
The research is pointing in that direction. We need more studies, of course, to confirm these findings and understand how it all works. But it's a super exciting area of research.
This whole thing about childhood and perception was mind-blowing. Pollan mentions research that suggests kids' brains are actually wired for a more psychedelic way of seeing the world. They haven't developed those rigid mental models that we have as adults, so their perception is a lot more fluid and imaginative.
That's so interesting. Children are constantly making new connections, exploring different possibilities. They see the world with this sense of wonder and awe. As we get older, our brains get better at filtering information and relying on established patterns of thought. It helps us navigate the world better, but it can also limit our creativity and flexibility.
So could psychedelics be a way to tap back into that childlike state of mind, to see the world with fresh eyes and break free from those rigid mental models?
That's a great question. If we can figure out how psychedelics temporarily disrupt the default settings of the adult brain, maybe we can use those same mechanisms to promote creativity, enhance problem solving, and even improve emotional well-being.
It makes you wonder what we're missing out on by clinging to those rigid ways of thinking.
Absolutely. Maybe psychedelics are showing us the potential of the human mind to experience reality in ways we haven't even imagined yet.
You brought up predictive coding earlier. Can you break that down a bit more for our listeners?
Sure. Predictive coding is a really interesting theory about how our brains work. Basically, it says that our brains are always creating models of the world based on our past experiences and expectations.
So we're not just passively observing reality, we're actively creating it.
Exactly. Our brains are constantly predicting what we're going to experience and then comparing those predictions to what we actually sense. When there's a mismatch, our brains update their models.
Okay, I get it. And here's where it gets trippy. This is happening all the time, even when we're not aware of it. So our perception of reality is always being filtered through this lens of expectation and prediction.
That's right. And what psychedelics seem to do is mess with that predictive coding process. They introduce new sensory information that doesn't fit into our existing models, so our brains have to reevaluate and update those models.
Whoa, so they're like shaking things up on a fundamental level, forcing our brains to rethink everything they thought they knew about reality.
Yeah, it's a powerful idea. It shows how psychedelics can expand our understanding of consciousness and challenge our basic assumptions about what reality even is.
Okay, but how does this all connect back to the question of whether these experiences are actually real or just a placebo effect?
Well, if our brains are actively constructing our reality based on our predictions and expectations, then psychedelics offer this unique way to disrupt that process. They introduce experiences that challenge those predictions, forcing the brain to create new models of understanding.
So it's not just the drug itself, it's about how the drug interacts with our brains and forces us to face the limitations of our own perception.
Exactly. The experience is a combination of the drug's effects and the brain's response to those effects. It's this interplay between the two that creates the unique and often transformative nature of the psychedelic experience.
That makes sense. So if what we call normal waking consciousness is just one way of perceiving reality, what other possibilities are out there? What happens when those filters are removed?
That's a huge question. It's one that philosophers and scientists have been thinking about forever. Psychedelics give us this incredible tool to explore the nature of consciousness and the limits of perception. They allow us to glimpse into other realms of experience, to question our assumptions about reality, and connect with parts of ourselves that might be hidden beneath the surface of our everyday awareness.
It's like psychedelics are a key that unlocks this hidden room in the house of our consciousness. And we didn't even know the room existed until we turned the key. And what we find in that room could be amazing, but also scary, right? It could challenge our deepest beliefs and make us face our fears, and even reveal how everything is connected.
Absolutely. It's a journey that can completely change you,
Yeah.
but it's not easy.
It's like Poland says, psychedelics are a technology of consciousness. They're tools that can be used in good ways or bad ways. And it's really important to approach them with respect, clear intentions, and an understanding of the risks and rewards.
And maybe even more important is remembering that the psychedelic experience is just that, an experience. It's a doorway to new ways of seeing things, but it's not the destination. The real work is integrating those insights into our daily lives, our relationships, our work, our understanding of the world.
So how do we actually do that? How do we take what we learn from these incredible experiences and make them relevant to our normal lives?
That's the art of integration. It means reflecting on the insights you get during the journey, connecting them to your values and goals, and figuring out how to live those insights out in your actions and how you interact with others.
It's like bringing back treasures from a faraway land and finding ways to weave them into the fabric of our everyday lives.
Right, and those treasures might inspire us to live more mindfully and with more intention. Just like the things we learn from psychedelic journeys can help us develop more compassion, more creativity, and more connection in our lives.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? We've explored how powerful expectations can be, the fascinating neuroscience of the default mode network, and how psychedelics might have the potential to treat different conditions. What are you taking away from all of this?
If I had to leave you with one key takeaway, it's this. Our minds are way more flexible than we think. The reality we experience isn't fixed or objective. It's actively constructed by our brains, shaped by our expectations, beliefs, and past experiences.
And it sounds like psychedelics might offer a way to shake up those ingrained patterns of thinking, to stir things up and let new perspectives come to the surface.
Exactly. They offer a glimpse into how adaptable consciousness really is, the possibility of seeing the world in radically different ways. But it's crucial to remember that these substances are powerful tools, and we should treat them with respect, intention, and an understanding of the potential risks.
It's like Poland says, psychedelics aren't for everyone. They're not a quick fix or a way to escape reality. They're a serious endeavor, and the journey can be tough and unpredictable.
That's true. But for those who feel drawn to explore these realms of consciousness, the potential rewards are immense. They can lead to profound personal insights, a deeper connection to yourself and the world around you, and even a transformation of your values and how you view life.
Even if you're not interested in trying psychedelics yourself, understanding their impact on the brain and consciousness can still teach us a lot about how our own minds work.
Definitely. This research on psychedelics is shedding light on how incredibly flexible and adaptable the human brain is. It's showing us the power of expectation, the influence of cultural narratives, and the possibility of rewiring our mental circuits to break free from limiting beliefs and behaviors.
It's like opening up this whole new frontier in understanding who we are and what we might be capable of becoming.
And it makes us ask big questions about the nature of reality, the boundaries of the self, and the potential of human consciousness. It's a really exciting time for this kind of research, and I'm so curious to see what new discoveries and insights will emerge in the years to come.
You know, what I keep thinking about is this idea of what we consider normal, everyday consciousness is just one way of perceiving reality. Then what other possibilities are out there, and what would it take to explore those other states safely and responsibly? That's something we can all ponder.
Absolutely. Exploring consciousness is an ongoing journey, and psychedelics offer a unique and powerful tool for mapping those uncharted territories. But just like any exploration, it's important to proceed carefully, with curiosity and a deep respect for the unknown,